I didn't understand back then why some places feel like they're breathing. I just know now that they are. I'm 62 years old as I tell this, and I've carried what happened for most of my life. Not a day goes by where it doesn't come back in small ways, in quiet rooms, in empty woods, in the moments right before sleep when the world is still and my thoughts are loud. I never planned to tell this story. I promised myself I wouldn't, but time has a way of loosening things you buried too deep, and lately it's felt wrong to keep it locked away. This happened a little over 30 years ago, in a stretch of land most people don't bother naming. Northern Arizona, high desert turning into forest, long roads with no signs. Back then, it was quieter than it is now. Fewer people, fewer rules. The kind of place where the wind carried farther than voices ever could. You could stand outside at night and hear nothing but your own breathing and the trees shifting slowly, like they were adjusting their weight. At that point in my life, I was working land surveys for the county. Nothing special. Just measuring, marking, mapping places no one planned to visit anytime soon. I was younger, newly married, and trying hard to be steady, responsible. I took pride in knowing the terrain, in being the guy who didn't get lost, who didn't panic when equipment failed or weather turned. I believed that understanding the land meant it would never surprise me. Life was simple then. Long days, early mornings, coffee that tasted burnt no matter how you made it. I slept fine. I laughed easily. The world felt solid under my feet. Even the forests felt honest. Quiet, but honest. You listened, and they listened back. Or at least that's what I thought. The first shift didn't come as fear. It came as confusion. Little things. A stretch of land that didn't match older records. A marked area that felt avoided, even by animals. No birds, no tracks crossing through, just empty space like a held breath. I told myself it was nothing. Land changes, nature moves. That was my job, to accept that. But the feeling followed me home. Not panic, just a weight. Like realizing someone had been standing behind you after they'd already walked away. I started sleeping lighter, waking up before dawn without knowing why. I didn't talk about it. There was nothing to say yet. Nothing solid enough to sound sane. Looking back, I see how calm it all still was. How much mercy there was in that early quiet, before questions turned into answers, before I understood that some things aren't lost. They're hidden, and some places aren't empty. They're waiting. Because not long after that, I found something in the land that didn't want to be found. And once I did, nothing around me ever slept the same way again. Back then, I thought knowing the land meant I was safe in it. I was wrong about that. I was 29 years old when all of this started. Young enough to still believe hard work solved most problems, old enough to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me every morning. My wife Ellen and I had been married just under 3 years, no kids yet. We lived in a small rental outside of town, close enough that I could drive to work before sunrise and still be home by dinner most nights. Ellen worried when I worked the remote surveys. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in the way she asked questions. How far out are you going today? Will you be back before dark? Do you have enough fuel? I always answered with confidence. I needed to. I was trying to be dependable, trying to be the kind of man who didn't bring his work home with him. My job kept me alone a lot. Days spent walking tree lines, marking points, checking old records against the real world. It was quiet work, honest work. I liked the silence back then. It gave me time to think, to plan, to imagine a future that felt solid and normal. A house, a family, stability. The area I was assigned that month sat farther out than usual. A patch of land that hadn't been properly surveyed in decades. Old notes, faded markers. No recent complaints or development plans. It was the kind of assignment no one argued over. Quiet, simple, forgettable, or so it seemed. I remember telling Ellen I'd be gone for a few longer days that week. She nodded, forced a smile, and reminded me to pack extra water. I kissed her goodbye like I always did. Neither of us knew how important that moment would feel later, how heavy it would become in memory. My father had taught me to respect the outdoors, but not fear it. He believed land was something you learned, not something that hunted you. I carried that mindset with me. I trusted maps, tools, experience. I trusted my own judgment. That trust made me careless in ways I didn't understand yet. The closer I got to that area, the more isolated everything felt. Roads narrowed, radio signals faded. Even the air felt different. Thinner somehow, sharper in my lungs. I told myself it was elevation, weather, nerves, anything that sounded reasonable. What I didn't tell Ellen was that I'd already started noticing small gaps in the records, missing notes, vague descriptions where there should have been detail, entire sections marked with warnings instead of measurements. Avoided terrain. That phrase stuck with me. Avoided by who? And why? Still, I went. Because that's what I did. I showed up, I measured, I marked, I moved forward. I didn't know yet that I was stepping into something my family line had never touched before, and once I did, it wouldn't just be my life that felt the change. The quiet there wasn't normal. It waited. I reached the edge of the survey zone just after mid-morning. The sun was up, but it didn't feel warm the way it should have. Light filtered through the trees in thin strips, never fully touching the ground. The forest was thicker than the map suggested, older too. Trees grew close together, their branches locking overhead like they were trying to keep something in, or out. I parked my truck on a patch of dirt that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. No tire tracks, no footprints, not even animal sign near the tree line. That should have been my first real warning. Even the quietest places usually show life if you know where to look. This place didn't. As soon as I stepped out, the air felt heavy, not hot, not cold, just dense, like breathing through damp cloth. Sounds didn't carry well there. When I shut the truck door, the noise died too fast. No echo, no birds startled into flight. It was like the forest chose not to react. I checked my equipment out of habit more than need. Compass, markers, notebook. Everything worked. Everything looked normal. That almost made it worse. I remember thinking how strange it was that nothing felt wrong enough to justify the unease crawling up my spine. The walk-in wasn't long, but it felt longer with every step. The ground sloped gently downward, the soil darker and softer than I expected. Leaves were pressed flat in places, not scattered naturally. I knelt once and touched the earth. It was packed down hard, like something heavy had rested there more than once. Still, I told myself it was erosion. Weather, elk bedding down. I needed those answers to be true. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No wind, no insects. My own footsteps sounded too loud, too sharp. I slowed without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind caught up. Every few yards I had the feeling I was being watched, not from one direction but from all around at once. Then I saw the markings. They weren't official survey stakes, they weren't blazes or trail signs either. Just shallow cuts in the bark of several trees, all at the same height, too deliberate, too even. They formed a loose circle, wide enough that I couldn't see the full shape from where I stood. I stepped closer, heart beating faster now. The smell hit me then, faint but sharp, like old pennies rubbed together. Copper. It didn't belong there. Forests have a clean smell, even when they're damp. This wasn't that. At the center of the circle, the ground dipped slightly. Not a hole, not a cave. Just a depression, smooth around the edges, as if something had pressed itself into the earth again and again. I stood at the edge of it for a long time, trying to convince myself it meant nothing. That's when I realized something else. The tracks around it weren't random. They didn't come and go the way animal trails do. They circled, overlapped, returned to the same place from different angles. Whatever made them wasn't passing through. It wasn't living here by chance. Everything pointed back to this one spot, like the land itself had been shaped around it. I told myself I was overthinking it. That was easier than admitting I felt afraid. I stayed longer than I should have. Long enough for the quiet to start pressing in on me. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing, your heartbeat, the soft scrape of your boots against dirt. I moved around the edge of that depression, forcing myself to take notes, to do my job like this was any other survey point. That's when I noticed the scratches. They weren't deep, just long, shallow lines carved into the bark of a nearby tree. Too wide for claws, too uneven to be tool marks. They ran downward, starting higher than my head and stopping at about chest level. I reached out and touched them without thinking. The wood felt dry and brittle, like it had been exposed too long. A cold wind slipped through the trees then, sudden and sharp. It carried no smell of pine or dust, just that faint copper tang again. The branches above me creaked softly, even though there wasn't enough wind to move them. I stepped back, my chest tight, and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, no birds burst out, no animals scattered. The forest didn't react at all. That's what scared me most. Nature usually responds when you disturb it. This place felt like it was holding still on purpose. I considered leaving. I really did. I remember standing there, notebook in hand, weighing pride against instinct. Pride won. It usually did back then. I convinced myself I just needed more information. One more look, one more walk around the area. That's when I found the trail. It wasn't obvious at first. Just a slight break in the ground where leaves didn't settle right. The soil there was darker, packed down the same way as the depression. It sloped downhill, winding between trees too closely spaced for any normal animal path. As I followed it with my eyes, a deep unease settled into my stomach. This trail didn't wander. It led somewhere. I took a few steps forward before stopping myself. The air felt colder down that way, thicker. Even the light seemed dimmer, like the trees were swallowing it. I remember thinking how wrong it felt to keep going, like crossing a line I couldn't see. Behind me, the forest stayed silent. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. But the feeling of being watched returned, stronger now, focused, like something had noticed my hesitation and was waiting to see what I'd choose. I stood there longer than I should have, staring down that narrow path, knowing, deep down, that once I followed it, I wouldn't be able to pretend this was just another job. What would you do in that moment? Turn back or follow the trail? I tightened my grip on my notebook and took a step forward. The ground dipped sharply ahead, opening into a darker stretch of land I hadn't seen on the maps at all. Something outside knew when I was awake. I could feel it. I didn't head back to town that evening. The light faded faster than I expected, and by the time I reached my truck, the sky had already started to darken. Driving out in unfamiliar terrain at night didn't feel smart, so I decided to camp near the edge of the survey zone like I'd done dozens of times before. I told myself that staying meant control. Familiar ground, routine. That lie didn't last long. The night settled in thick and quiet. No wind, no insects. Even the usual distant sounds, owls, rustling leaves, never came. I sat by a small fire, its light barely reaching beyond the first ring of trees. The darkness beyond felt solid, like a wall. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, measured. Not close enough to see, but close enough that I knew it wasn't mine. It came from somewhere low to the ground, just beyond the firelight. I froze, every muscle tight, listening hard. When I leaned forward, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I waited, telling myself it was an animal. Elk, deer, something curious. But animals don't stop breathing when you listen for them. They don't match your stillness. A branch snapped to my left, then another behind me. Not crashing, not careless, controlled, like footsteps placed with thought. The sound circled the camp, always just outside the light. Never closer, never farther. My heart pounded so hard it made my ears ring. "Hey!" I called out, hating how small my voice sounded. "Go on." The forest didn't answer. Instead, I heard something shift beneath me. Not under the cot, under the ground. A dull scrape. Slow, heavy, like something rolling over in its sleep. The fire crackled louder for a moment, then settled again. I could smell it then. That copper scent, stronger now, mixed with damp earth. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Minutes passed, or hours. I couldn't tell. The sounds came and went. Soft pacing, slow breathing. Once I heard something knock against the underside of the ground, 3 times, evenly spaced. Then nothing. At some point, exhaustion dragged my eyes closed. I don't remember falling asleep, only jerking awake later, soaked in sweat, certain I'd heard my name whispered right next to my ear. But there was no one there. The fire had burned low. The forest stood frozen. And that watching feeling, it hadn't left. It had settled. That's when it hit me, clear and cold. This wasn't random. This wasn't curiosity. Whatever was out there knew exactly where I was, and it wanted me to know it too. I wasn't alone anymore. I was being studied. Morning came without relief. The light didn't chase the fear away. It only showed me how real it was. The forest looked the same as the day before, but it felt different now. Closer, like it had leaned in overnight and never stepped back. I packed up quickly, hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. The ground around my camp told a story I hadn't been able to see in the dark. The soil was pressed down in wide arcs, circling where I'd slept. No clear footprints, no claw marks, just flattened earth, as if something heavy had moved slowly around me for hours. The smell was stronger in daylight. That copper scent clung to the air and my clothes, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. I tried to convince myself it was mineral-rich soil, iron, anything normal, but deep down, I knew better. As I followed the trail again, the forest began to change. Trees stood farther apart, their trunks scarred with the same shallow cuts I'd seen before. Some were fresh, pale wood exposed. Others were old and darkened, like this place had been used for a long time. Halfway down the slope I felt it. Eyes. Not the feeling of being watched from everywhere, but from one spot. Focused. Patient. I stopped moving, heart pounding, and slowly turned my head. Between 2 trees, deep in shadow, something reflected the light. Eyes. They weren't bright like an animal's. They didn't blink. They just stared back at me, low to the ground at first, then rising. The shape behind them shifted wrong. Too smooth, too stretched, like a shadow pulling itself upright. I couldn't see its face. I don't think it wanted me to. It moved without sound, sliding behind the trees faster than anything that size should have been able to. One second it was there, the next it wasn't. No crash, no snapped branches, just gone. My legs felt weak. I leaned against a tree, breathing hard, trying not to panic. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my mind filling in blanks. Then I heard it. My voice, not shouted, not whispered, spoken calmly from somewhere ahead on the trail. "Hey!" I froze. It sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same pace. Even the slight rasp I get when I'm tired. The sound came again, closer this time. "Hey, you okay?" The smell hit me again, stronger than ever, thick and metallic. My stomach turned. I wanted to run. Every part of me screamed to turn around and run until my lungs gave out. Instead, I stood there, trapped between disbelief and fear. Because whoever or whatever had made that sound wasn't guessing. It knew how I spoke. It knew how I sounded when I was calm. Then it said my name. Perfectly. The earth there felt wrong under my hands. Too warm. Too smooth. After it said my name, I don't remember deciding to move forward. I just did. My legs carried me down the trail like they were no longer waiting for permission. Turning back felt impossible now, like the forest behind me had already closed. The path narrowed until I had to turn sideways between trees. The air grew damp, heavy with that copper smell and something else beneath it. Old rot, like leaves that had been wet too long. My breathing sounded loud in my ears, but nothing answered it. No footsteps, no voice, just the steady feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. The ground dipped sharply ahead, opening into a shallow hollow hidden by brush and fallen limbs. From a distance it looked natural, just another low spot where rainwater might collect. but as I stepped closer, I saw how wrong it was. The earth had been pressed down into a wide oval shape, smoother than the surrounding ground. Leaves didn't stay there. They slid off the edges, like the surface rejected them. When I knelt, heat rose faintly from it, enough that I could feel it on my palms through my gloves. This wasn't a den. It was a place something lay down. Around the edges, the soil was marked with long drag lines, all leading inward. Some were fresh. Others had softened with time. The pattern told a clear story. Something large came here often. It didn't sleep like an animal curling up for warmth. It stretched out, rested, returned. I felt sick. I noticed then that the trees around the hollow leaned slightly inward. Not broken, not bent by wind, just angled. Their bark was scarred with the same shallow cuts, layered over each other like tallies. The higher marks were well above where any animal could reach. I stood slowly, my head spinning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I heard movement behind me, not rushing, not hiding, standing. I didn't turn right away. I was too afraid of what I might see. My body locked up, every muscle tight, waiting for the sound of breath or footsteps or that voice again. Instead, there was silence. When I finally looked, nothing stood there. But the space between the trees felt occupied, like something had just stepped back. The smell deepened, thick enough to taste. I realized then that this place wasn't hidden to keep others out. It was hidden to keep it undisturbed. A thought settled into my mind, cold and heavy. This thing didn't wander, it didn't roam, it stayed close to where it slept, and I was standing right in the middle of its space. Somewhere nearby, branches shifted softly, not snapping, not breaking, just adjusting, like something large was moving carefully, making room for itself. I understood then that finding this place wasn't a mistake. It was the reason I was here. It didn't rush me. It waited. The moment stretched longer than it should have. I stood at the edge of that hollow, every nerve tight, listening to the forest breathe around me. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt crowded, pressed in from all sides, like something had closed a door I hadn't seen. That's when I saw the eyes again. They appeared between two trees uphill from the hollow, just at the edge of the shade, low at first, then slowly rising. The light caught them wrong, too reflective, too steady. They didn't blink. They didn't move the way animal eyes do when they're unsure. They were watching. The shape behind them shifted, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't clear, not fully. Just a suggestion of a body that didn't settle into one form, shoulders that lifted too high, a neck that seemed too long, limbs that bent where they shouldn't have. It stepped forward once. The ground didn't crunch. Leaves didn't move. It glided, smooth and quiet, stopping just outside the ring of trees that circled the hollow. The smell rolled off it in waves, copper, damp earth, something old and sour underneath. My mouth went dry. I couldn't scream. I couldn't run. My body refused to do either. It tilted its head, slow and careful, like it was studying me the way I'd studied the land. Then it opened its mouth. No sound came out. Instead, I heard it in my head. A memory of sound. A voice that didn't belong there. My wife's. "Please," it said softly. "Come back." My knees almost gave out. I knew it wasn't her. I knew that with every logical part of my mind. But the sound hit something deeper than logic. It pulled at me, tugged at memories, at warmth and safety and home. The thing watched my reaction closely, like it was learning which strings to pull. It took another step forward, and I saw its legs clearly for the first time. They bent backward slightly, the joints wrong, the movement too smooth. It stopped again, careful not to cross into the hollow. That's when I understood something that made the fear spike sharper. It wasn't allowed there, not while I was standing in it. The realization came with a sudden sense of pressure, like the air itself had shifted. This place mattered. The hollow wasn't just where it slept. It was something like a boundary, a center, and right now I was standing where it rested. The eyes narrowed. The voice changed. This time it sounded like me again. calm, controlled, reasonable. You shouldn't be here. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a root, and nearly fell. The thing didn't move to stop me. It just watched, patient, as if it knew time was on its side. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. The moment my foot left the edge of the hollow, the forest seemed to release a breath. Leaves shifted. The light changed. The thing straightened, taller now, more solid. I realized then that it had been letting me see it, letting me understand just enough. Should I have run the moment I saw it, or was it already too late? Behind me, something shifted in the trees, closing off the trail I'd come from. It wanted me scared, but not gone. The path behind me didn't disappear, not completely. It just felt wrong now, like something had shifted its weight across it. I could still see where I'd walked in, but my body knew better than to try. The air there felt thicker, heavier, like pushing through deep water. The thing moved again, circling the hollow without stepping into it. Every motion was careful, measured, like it was following rules I didn't understand. Its eyes never left me, not even when it slipped behind a tree and reappeared somewhere else without sound. It began to mimic, not just voices, movements. When I took a slow step back, it mirrored me from the tree line. When I raised my hand, it lifted its arm a second later, the motion delayed like it was learning how joints worked. Its fingers bent too many times before settling into something close to human. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might pass out. Then it made a sound I hadn't heard yet. Crying. Soft. Broken. A man trying not to be heard. It came from off to my right, then from behind me, then from directly ahead. Each time closer, clearer. The sounds overlapped, wrong and layered, like echoes without a source. I covered my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "Stop," I whispered. Everything went quiet. When I opened my eyes, it stood closer than before. Close enough now that I could see its skin, if that's what it was. Pale in places, darker in others, stretched tight over angles that didn't belong together. It leaned forward slightly, head tilted, studying my fear with something that felt like interest. Then it turned its head sharply toward the trees downhill, toward the hollow's far side. It took a step in that direction and stopped, looking back at me, waiting. A sick understanding crept into my chest. This wasn't a chase. It wasn't even a threat. Not yet. It was an invitation, or a command. I couldn't tell which terrified me more. I shook my head, backing away again. The thing didn't react with anger. Instead, the crying sound returned, softer now, sad, almost disappointed. The forest responded this time. Branches shifted, leaves rustled in patterns that felt intentional. The path I'd come from narrowed further, shadows deepening until it barely looked passable at all. The only clear way left was where it wanted me to go. I took a single step forward before I could stop myself. The thing straightened. It didn't smile, but something about its posture changed, like approval. In that moment, I understood the truth. It wasn't hunting me. It was guarding this place, and it needed me to see why. I finally had a name for it. That didn't help. As I moved where it wanted me to go, the forest opened just enough to show me pieces of the truth I'd been avoiding. The ground changed first. Rocks broke through the soil in jagged lines, and the trees thinned into a crooked half-circle around another dip in the land. This one was older than the hollow, deeper, meaner somehow. The thing stayed to my left, never quite beside me, never behind. It kept pace without walking. When I slowed, it slowed. When I stopped, it stopped. The smell followed us both, thick and metallic, clinging to the back of my throat. That's when I saw the signs I couldn't explain away. Bones, not scattered like an animal kill. Placed, lined along the edges of the dip, half buried, bleached by time. Some were old, some weren't. A few still carried scraps of fabric caught on rough edges. Threads faded by sun and weather, but unmistakably human. My stomach twisted. I looked at the thing then, really looked. The way its body never fully settled. How its outline blurred at the edges, like it couldn't decide what shape to keep. When it moved, its joints bent wrong for a second before correcting themselves. Like it was wearing something it didn't fully understand. The stories I'd grown up hearing came back to me all at once. Things people spoke about quietly, warnings disguised as jokes, creatures that wore skin like clothing, that copied voices, that lived close to places people shouldn't go. Skinwalker. The word landed heavy and cold in my mind, as if it heard the thought. The thing turned toward me. Its face shifted, subtle, sickening movements under the surface, until it resembled a man I didn't recognize but felt like I should. Familiar without memory. The eyes stayed wrong, too reflective, too knowing. It opened its mouth again. This time, the voice that came out wasn't anyone I knew. It was calm, flat, almost tired. "You woke me." The words didn't echo. They didn't carry. They felt placed directly into the air between us. My knees shook, but I stayed standing, trapped by fear and the need to understand. The thing gestured, an awkward motion of its arm, toward the hollow in the distance, toward the place it slept. "I rest," it said, "until found." My chest tightened. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Its head tilted. The skin along its neck stretched, then settled again. "You look," it said. "You listen." The forest seemed to lean closer. That's when it stepped fully into the light. For the first time, nothing hid it. Not shadow, not distance, not doubt. I saw its full height, its distorted human shape, the way its feet pressed into the ground like they were too heavy for the body above them. And I understood something else that chilled me deeper than fear. It could have killed me at any time. It chose not to. Because I wasn't there to be hunted. I was there to be shown. It wanted me to see it up close. There was no doubt about that now. The Skinwalker shifted its weight and stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Each movement felt heavy, like the ground itself noticed and reacted. The soil pressed inward under its feet, leaving deep impressions that didn't fade when it lifted them again. I couldn't move. Fear held me in place, but so did something else. Understanding. A terrible kind of clarity. Running wouldn't save me. Not here. Not from something that could move without sound and wear voices like masks. It raised one arm, not threatening, not welcoming, just directing, pointing past me toward the deeper trees where the land dipped again, where the forest grew darker and older. I took a step back instead. The Skinwalker reacted instantly. The air shifted, heavy and sharp. That copper smell flooded my senses so strongly it made my eyes water. The thing's posture changed, not angry, but focused. Its shoulders rolled forward, its neck lengthening slightly, head lowering as if to fit into a shape more familiar to it. It circled me now, wider than before, cutting off space with every step. Trees that had stood still moments ago began to creak softly, branches lowering like arms. Shadows overlapped in ways that made distance hard to judge. The Skinwalker stopped directly in front of me. Up close, the details were worse. Its skin wasn't skin the way ours is. It looked worn, used, like something pulled too tight and patched too many times. I could see where it didn't quite fit, where the shape underneath pressed wrong. It leaned forward. The voice came again. Not in my head this time, but in the air, vibrating low and close. "Do not leave," it said. Not a threat, a rule. I swallowed hard. "Why?" I asked, though part of me didn't want the answer. It turned its head slightly, eyes drifting back toward the hollow where it slept. The place that anchored it, the place I had disturbed. "Because you know now," it said, "and knowing changes things." The forest responded like it understood. Paths blurred. Light dimmed. The way back no longer felt like a way at all, just more trees, more shadows, more silence. The Skinwalker lifted its hand and pressed it against the trunk of a nearby tree. The bark rippled beneath its touch, shifting like water disturbed by a stone. The tree leaned, opening a narrow passage between roots and rock I hadn't noticed before. A way forward. I realized then that this wasn't about trapping me forever. It was about taking me somewhere. Somewhere I hadn't seen yet. Somewhere everything would finally make sense. And with that understanding came a deeper fear than anything before. Because whatever waited ahead, the Skinwalker believed I was ready for it. I wasn't the first to find this place. That truth hit harder than fear. The passage the Skinwalker opened led downward, narrow and uneven. Roots twisted along the walls like veins, and the rock beneath my boots felt worn smooth, as if countless steps had passed this way long before mine. The air grew colder with every step, damp and heavy, carrying that same copper smell mixed with something older, dust and decay that had never seen sunlight. The Skinwalker didn't touch me, but I felt it close behind, not breathing, not moving the way a body should, just present. The passage opened into a wider chamber hidden beneath the earth. It wasn't a cave carved by water or time. The walls were too rounded, too deliberate, like the ground itself had been shaped by pressure over years and years. That's when I saw them. Personal items, boot soles worn thin, a rusted belt buckle, a cracked pair of glasses folded carefully and placed against the wall. None of it was piled or scattered. Everything had been arranged with care, like keepsakes, like reminders. My legs went weak. These weren't trophies. They were markers. I realized then why the hollow above was so smooth, why the trees leaned inward. This place wasn't just where it slept, it was where it waited. And people like me, people who noticed patterns and followed them, were drawn here again and again over time. The Skinwalker stepped past me, its shape brushing the wall without sound. It reached down and touched the ground at the center of the chamber. The earth there was darker, richer, pressed deep. I knew without being told that this was the core, the place everything turned around. "You wake me," it said calmly. "Then I wake others." A cold realization settled in my chest. "Others like me," I whispered. It didn't deny it. "You see what is hidden," it said. "When you come, the land opens. When the land opens, I must rise." My hand shook. I thought of the missing records, the warnings, the avoided terrain. This wasn't random land no one cared about. It was land people learned to stay away from, after they lost someone to it. "Why let me live?" I asked. The Skinwalker turned its head slowly. Up close, its eyes reflected everything. Me, the chamber, the fear I couldn't hide. They held no anger, no hunger. "Because you will leave," it said, "and you will remember." The weight of that promise crushed me. Leaving didn't mean freedom. It meant carrying this knowledge out into the world. It meant knowing what slept beneath the land and why it woke. The chamber seemed to tighten around us. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. I felt something shift inside me then. Panic finally broke through the shock and disbelief. This was the breaking point. I couldn't stay. I couldn't forget. And I couldn't pretend this wasn't connected to me now in a way I'd never escape. If this was you, would you run and never look back, or stay and learn everything it wanted to show? The Skinwalker stepped aside, opening a narrow path leading upward. It was letting me go. But as I took my first step toward the light, a terrifying thought followed me out of the chamber. Some things don't wake alone. Some things are meant to sleep forever. I learned that too late. The path upward was steep, narrow enough that my shoulders brushed the walls. Light filtered down in thin lines from above, gray and weak, like dawn struggling through heavy clouds. Every step away from the chamber felt wrong, like pulling against something that didn't want to let go. The Skinwalker followed at a distance, not close enough to touch, not far enough to forget. As we climbed, the forest sounds slowly returned. Faint at first. A breeze moving through branches, the distant call of a bird. It felt unreal, like hearing life through a wall. The closer I got to the surface, the more my chest tightened, because part of me understood something I hadn't wanted to accept. It wasn't finished with me. We emerged near the original hollow, the place where it slept. The light there looked different now, sharper, the ground darker, as if the earth itself had been disturbed by what I'd seen below. The trees leaned closer than before, their branches lowering like they were listening. The Skinwalker stepped beside the hollow and finally turned fully toward me. "You know now," it said. I nodded slowly, afraid that speaking might change something. "It wakes," the creature continued, gesturing to the land around us. "When found, when noticed. Curiosity breaks the rest." A sick realization took shape. "So every time someone comes too close," I began. "It rises," it finished, "and the land remembers." I thought of the items in the chamber, the careful way they'd been placed, people who had come here just like me, people who noticed patterns, people who couldn't ignore what felt wrong. "What happens to them?" I asked. The Skinwalker looked away, its form shifting subtly, like a shadow trying to hold still. "Some run," it said. "Some stay. Some never leave the ground." My stomach turned. I understood then that this wasn't just a monster guarding its den. It was part of a cycle, a consequence, a response to human attention. It didn't hunt for sport. It didn't wander. It waited, and I had woken it. The Skinwalker stepped back, giving me space. For the first time since I'd met it, I felt something close to pity radiating from it. Not for me, but for what came next. "You will go," it said. "You will speak in silence. You will warn without words." I shook my head. "No one will believe me." Its eyes met mine, steady and knowing. "They will not need to," it said. "The land will teach them." The forest shifted again, opening the path I'd used to enter. Clear now. Obvious. An exit offered without resistance. The Skinwalker retreated toward the hollow, lowering itself carefully into the place it slept. As its body pressed into the earth, the ground seemed to accept it, reshaping around its form. Leaves slid back into place. Shadows deepened. Before it disappeared completely, it spoke one last time. "Do not return." Then the land went still. I stood there alone, shaking, knowing with a certainty that cut deeper than fear. It wasn't gone. It was resting again. I thought leaving meant surviving. I was wrong. The walk back to my truck didn't feel like an escape. It felt like being released. The forest no longer blocked my path, but it didn't welcome me either. Trees stood farther apart now, their branches lifted just enough to let me pass, like a crowd stepping aside without turning their backs. Every sound felt too loud. My boots on dirt, my breath, my heartbeat. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, soft, measured, matching my pace, but nothing followed. That silence scared me more than pursuit ever could. The closer I got to the truck, the worse my body felt. My hands trembled so badly I dropped my keys twice. My mouth tasted like metal. The copper smell clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin, no matter how deeply I breathed through my nose. When the engine finally turned over, I felt a rush of relief so sharp it almost hurt. I didn't look back as I drove away. I couldn't. Part of me knew that if I did, something would be standing there, watching calmly as I left. The road felt longer than it should have. Curves I didn't remember stretched out in front of me. The radio crackled with static, voices trying to form words, but never quite getting there. Once, just once, I heard my own voice come through the speaker, whispering my name. I shut it off and drove the rest of the way in silence. I made it home just before dawn. Ellen was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. Relief hit me all over again, heavy and warm. I stood there for a long time just watching her breathe, grounding myself in something real. But even then, something felt off. The house smelled wrong, faint, metallic. I told myself it was my clothes. Dirt, sweat, fear. I showered until the water ran cold, scrubbed my hands until they were red. Still, the smell lingered, faint but present, like a memory that wouldn't fade. Over the next few days, things didn't return to normal. I started waking up just before dawn every morning, heart racing, certain someone had been standing at the foot of the bed. I heard footsteps outside the house at night, slow, careful ones that stopped whenever I looked out the window. Animals avoided our yard. Birds that used to gather on the fence never came back. Once I found shallow scratches on the side of the shed, long and uneven, starting higher than they should have been able to. I didn't go back to that survey site. I told my supervisor the area was unstable, unsafe. I didn't explain more than that. I didn't have to. Something in my face must have convinced him, but distance didn't break the connection. One night, weeks later, I stood in the backyard, staring into the dark tree line beyond our property. The wind was still, the world quiet. Then I heard it, breathing, slow, familiar, not close, but not far enough, and in that moment, the truth settled into me with crushing weight. Leaving the place didn't mean it stayed behind. I still smell copper sometimes, even now. I'm an old man as I say this, older than I ever expected to be after what happened. I left that job within the year, moved twice, changed routines, changed roads. I did everything people do when they believe distance can fix what memory breaks. For a long time I told myself it worked. Life moved on. We had kids, grandkids, birthdays and quiet evenings. I learned how to laugh again, how to sit in the woods without shaking. I almost convinced myself that what I'd found back then stayed buried. Almost. Because some nights, when the world is quiet enough, I hear breathing outside my window. Slow, patient. The same measured sound I heard that first night in the forest. It never gets closer. It never moves away. It just waits, like it's listening for something. Sometimes I wake just before dawn and feel that familiar weight in the air, like the land itself is holding its breath. I'll lie there, staring at the ceiling, afraid to move, afraid that if I do, I'll hear my name spoken softly from the dark. I never went back to that place. I kept that promise, but I've come to understand something far worse. It doesn't need me to return. I see it in small things now, in places where animals refuse to go, in stretches of land marked undevelopable without explanation, in missing sections of old maps. I recognize the signs because I was taught to see them, because it let me live. I used to believe the Skinwalker followed me, that it attached itself to me somehow, that I carried it with me like a curse. But over the years, another truth has settled in, colder and heavier than fear. It doesn't follow people. It follows attention. When someone notices a place they shouldn't, when they stop and listen, when curiosity pushes them one step too far off the path, that's when it wakes. That's when the land opens. I was just the first one near it in a long time. Now, when I hear stories about hikers disappearing or remote land being quietly closed off, I don't ask questions. I already know the answers. I know there's a place somewhere out there right now where the ground is smooth and warm, and the trees lean inward. A place where something is sleeping. And every so often, when the night is still and the air smells faintly of metal, I get the feeling it's closer than it used to be. Not hunting, not watching, just waiting for someone else to find where it sleeps.